And that's how these traditions work. We have all of those disturbing emotions, and then actually it's through awareness that they can be actually very productive emotions. Anger, if I'm not overwhelmed by it, it can become a sense of determination. Fear can become greater alertness and presence, discernment, right? So then how we engage with our experience of life is what makes all the difference.
Welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast, where we talk about everything from spirituality, self-development, relationships, mindfulness, wellness, and everything that will help you embrace all that you are so you can expand into the best version of yourself. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Embrace and Expand podcast. I am incredibly excited to introduce you to today's guest. So those of you that have been following the podcast since episode 1 have heard me mention his name numerous times. Since 1999, he has practiced the Eastern spiritual disciplines of Tibetan Buddhism, breathwork, meditation, QiGong, yoga, Shaolin, physical therapy, and Toltec practices. He has been working closely with the indigenous Peruvian cultures in the Amazonian rainforest and the Andean mountains since 2001. In 2004, he was pledged as a healer-curandero by the Whitoto and Yahua tribes and has served the international community as a medicine man ever since. Founder of Paititi Institute, where he and his team facilitate consciousness transformation, natural healing and disease prevention, as well as stewardship and eco-regenerative living. I would not be where I am today if it was not for visiting Paititi Institute in 2018, where the entire trajectory of my life drastically shifted. It is my great honor and pleasure to introduce you to Roman Hanis. Roman, welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast.
Thank you, Adam. It's wonderful to be here. And hello to all of the people who are listening.
Like I said in the intro, I have mentioned you several times just as I've talked about my own journey through my spiritual awakening early on in life and then where that has taken me and then taking me down to Peru and meeting you and Cynthia and the rest of the team there at Paititi Institute and just how much that has truly changed my life in so many different ways. But since many of them aren't familiar with you, aside from what I have mentioned about you, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey?
Well, my journey started on a conscious level about 20 some years ago. And I was experiencing a spiritual crisis, a health crisis at that time. And that was a blessing in disguise in a way, all of those crises that happened to me, because it made me really question the common narrative of society that I was living in and my own life that was predetermined for me in a way until that point. And that was causing me a lot of suffering without even being conscious of that. Just a lack of deeper inspiration, purpose, the spark of passion was lacking, and that was causing all kinds of issues in my life. And then that brought me onto this deep questioning on many levels. And I was desperate enough in a way where I was willing to try anything. And then, of course, nothing was working. And then that made me question even the process of trying. And gradually I came in contact with different modalities, practices, perspectives. So I initially started with studying the transpersonal Jungian psychology, and then I started working with alternative medicine modalities that included the Chinese medicine and the Taoist healing tradition. And then I began working at first with psychedelics in a way of self-exploration. So I was introduced to them in a more conscious way, and much later in my life. And so then with psychedelics also, that was an emergency resuscitation in a way for me in my life at that time. And at a certain point also I hit a ceiling with that, because it is a culture, the psychedelic culture is a fairly young culture today and still in the explorational phase. And so then at a certain point, I reached a ceiling where I began experiencing what people refer to as plastic love, in a way. And so then I got in touch with. I started hearing about it, and at that time it wasn't such a household name, ayahuasca, for example, like it is today. It was a much more rare occurrence, and only within more esoteric circles of people who practice spirituality for longer periods of time, it was something that would come up on occasion. And that made me very curious because I was experiencing very profound states that were very natural and very open, but then I would inevitably lose them. And so then I started noticing that there was a lack of discipline in my life, and there were too many holes in my personality through which the energy was leaking, and I could not sustain very awakened, alive states of being for long periods of time. And then I went to the Amazon rainforest in 2001. And in Amazon rainforest, then I met the living wisdom traditions that work with sacred plants as a way of discipline and in a way that has been tested through thousands of years of human experience. And there was enough time to explore and experiment, and then there was enough time to actually implement very sustainable ways to work with them that can be beneficial on many levels of life. And within those cultures, the psychedelics that I was engaging with, they appeared like children games in comparison. And even though I was taking them, quite seriously, and I was researching and exploring and reading lots of books on the subject and taking, very large doses of psychedelics at that time and had very profound experiences, but still it was children games in comparison to these ancient wisdom traditions and the mystery initiation schools that that are involved in those traditions. And then once I came to the Amazon rainforest, I had at that time an incurable in Western medicine health condition. It's a chronic, genetic, and in many cases, terminal illness. It was in my intestines. And it took me in the Amazon, it was a culmination of my path. It wasn't that it was separate from other things that I was doing, but in a way, everything that I was doing continuously helped me to develop a deeper relationship with my own being, with my life, with the organism that I'm inhabiting. And so that was a culmination. Once I came to the Amazon, it took about 8 months for me to go into full remission from the health condition that I had at that time. And I've been in full remission ever since. I'm not allowed by the modern medical, legal terminology to say that I was cured, but I've been experienced a full remission for over 20 years now, and there hasn't been a case of that condition. Of course, after I experienced that immense relief in my own being, there was nothing better that I could see myself doing with my life than to learn how to share these traditions with other people. And the Amazonian traditions and also the Andean, they're ancient mystery initiation paths that work with a very different mentality of the indigenous people that humanity has forgotten today. And so that's been an inspiration in my life to really bring those traditions in a way that is relevant, practical, and can be integrated into our current challenges in the world today, the current difficulties and the state of mind. And so that in a way actually has been just the beginning of my path, because that was the tip of the iceberg, right? And so it's been going deeper and deeper ever since. At first I healed from my condition to realize that the healing was just the beginning step towards greater freedom in my life. And then the path, of course, has become more geared towards freedom and of course, freedom from one's own, self-deception and yeah, all kinds of disturbances and issues in life. And so how to live life wholeheartedly and face everything fully open and not throw in the towel so easily. So yeah, in these traditions, they refer to it as evolutionary healing. So it doesn't mean that you have to have a physical illness, but it's a sense of disempowerment, lack of greater purpose, fulfillment, satisfaction. So, awakening one's greatest potential.
Yeah, and I can attest to that, at least the traditions that you teach do exactly that. I mean, I've said it numerous times throughout the podcast so far at how much the experiences that I had, and I went down there purely with the intention of wanting to experience ayahuasca. I didn't know that I was going to also experience Wachuma. I didn't know I was going to meet cacao. I didn't know I was going to meet breathwork. And what was interesting about all of those experiences is I went down there with a very specific expectation based on everything that I read, and especially reading Jeremy Narby's The Cosmic Serpent, Knowledge Through DNA. That book really portrays this certain view of what you might experience in the ayahuasca journey. And one of the things that I really appreciated on the very first night of the retreat was that you said to release all expectations of what that week was going to look like. Because if you have those expectations, it's going to limit your experience. But by being able to be open to what the possibilities are, you can actually go above and beyond and my expectations were blown out of the water in a very different way than I thought they were going to. The ayahuasca journeys for me were very, very gentle. And that was, I think, what I needed in that moment, and not to be blasted off into outer space and meet all kinds of interesting, entities and things like that, like some people do within their journeys, but to really just recognize that all the answers that I needed were within myself. And that was the message that I received on that very first ceremony, was that I need to stop looking outside of myself to find all of the answers, and to have somebody tell me that this is the way that you need to go in life, because only I can actually dictate that.
Beautiful, beautifully said. Yeah, very much so. It's these are living wisdom traditions, and essentially what they do is they support the intentional space for the living wisdom to awaken within each of us. And the traditions, they do work. The main wisdom within these traditions is the childlike nature, the beginner's mind. That the wise ones, they are the ones who really are like children within these traditions, and always willing to learn, always curious and full of awe and wonder. And so, yeah, the empty cup is very essential within these traditions, and not to have, I mean, expectations is different than intentions, right? So intentions is, I wish for something to happen, and I'm open to whatever way it can happen. And then expectation is, I'm open to it only in a very specific way, and it should look a certain way, like you said. So definitely it's very essential. Big part of the work is to just decondition ourselves, to purify the resistance to life as it flows, instead of expecting it to happen in a certain way.
Yeah. I reference it as like it's our iOS, it's our internal operating system. And we get to choose how that internal operating system actually runs and functions and how it's programmed. But most of us are still living off of the operating system we developed from 0 to 7 years old, based on our, upbringing from our parents, societal conditioning, things that we took on from our friends and school, and all of that sort of thing. So I love that you touch on the fact that it is about relearning not only the world around us, but who we are as an individual, because who I was entering that retreat was very, very different than the person that left that retreat.
Yeah, I see it as a process of unlearning. And my teachers refer to it sometimes as, they would share with me that in order to learn, first you have to learn how to learn within these traditions. And so a big part of it is the deconditioning. It's just to open up, right? The essential human qualities within these traditions, they are all about receptivity, tenderness, vulnerability, sincerity, openness. And those are the qualities that in our modern society, they sometimes are not honored so much, or even viewed as something negative that makes us kind of easy prey to the tough world and this kind of competitive reality. So then in these traditions, instead of maintaining an appearance of strength and toughness, actually softening and tapping into the greatest power, which is the power of nature, and that is our own organism. And so then it's the being brave enough to be vulnerable, right? That's the process, finding the greatest strength and the greatest weakness.
Mm. And embracing both of those, because we all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. But if we deny one over the other, we're just going to limit our overall experience. We're just going to limit what we're able to and actually capable of doing within life, because to acknowledge that we do have weaknesses is to admit that we still have work to do. And then that's where that whole unlearning process comes from, is to unlearn the fact that just because we have a weakness doesn't mean that we're wrong. It doesn't mean that we're less of a person. It just means we're human. I mean, it's just all part of the process.
Very much so. And I find that actually it's the weaknesses that make us strong. It's through the challenges, the difficulties, the hardships that since the beginning of human civilization and culture, people would be able to get together in the face of a greater challenge, in the face of a certain problem and issue, and then find the resilience, find collaboration, find kindness. And so all the noble qualities of humanity, that they have actually come through the issues that we have been facing since the very beginning. And I find that to be very essential to admit to those challenges, because the world that we live in today, the world of the fake book likes, I call it, and then everyone are maintaining such a nice appearance, and then everyone think that everyone else are doing so great, and I'm the only one who has issues, and nobody else seems to show them. And it's just that people are so good at hiding them, even from themselves. And then that creates a reality of separation, where everyone feels so isolated and alone and unrelated, and then nobody can understand them, and everyone experiences that. And then everyone are struggling and suffering. And it takes that bravery to admit that, I'm having those issues and I'm struggling, and I don't know how to deal with certain situations and upheavals and pains in my life, whether physical or emotional. And I want to learn, and I'm here, and I see that other people are experiencing that too, and that gives me strength to work through my own challenges. And then suddenly that which was creating suffering becomes a path towards liberation from it. When we recognize, hey, I'm separated, you are separated, suddenly we can relate to each other. We are no longer separate. There is a connection. And then we can join forces to discover the source of that separation. What is it coming from? And so I find that very beautiful, how it's actually the problem becomes the solution. The obstacle is the way. That's how these traditions work. Right? So by fully opening up to the challenges of our life, we are actually transforming and resolving them.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So I know there's probably many listeners who maybe this is the first one of my podcasts that they're listening to, or they've listened to a couple of others, but missed me referencing ayahuasca in the past. Will you kind of explain not only what it is, but the process in which that it goes through in order to actually be created, especially for ceremonial purposes? Because I think there's, like you said, it's become this household name now that most people who are on the spiritual path have heard of ayahuasca. But I think a lot of people that I have at least talked to who have experienced it, not in Peru or Costa Rica or the regions where it originates from, who have experienced it either here in the States or Europe or somewhere else within the world, have always asked me, why did you feel the need to travel to go and experience it? And I always tell them that it's because I felt that if I truly wanted to have a relationship with that plant medicine teacher, that I needed to go to her and not expect her to come to me.
Yeah, I find that ayahuasca was considered to be a skillful instrument within the ancient traditions. As a skillful instrument, it wasn't just the ayahuasca that was responsible for helping people. Actually, ayahuasca was an integral but small element within a much greater context of the spiritual practice, the discipline, the tradition that was interwoven with people's way of life, with people's environment, with people's cosmology, creation myths, the animals, the whole ecosystem. It's not just this one thing. In our modern world, we like to cherry pick and think, oh yeah, this is the thing that will save me. This is the magical pill or the magical potion, and it will solve all of my problems, and I just have to drink a lot of it. But it doesn't really work like that, right? It's like we can hammer nails with a microscope, and that's not what it's made for. So it is also very essential, especially in today's world, to understand how ayahuasca can be utilized as a skillful mean, as an instrument, right? And then, of course, within that, as we start to see that people drink ayahuasca today in huge amounts, and then they're still lost in their everyday life. So, and it was never meant to be as something that is taken out of context. And that's why I only serve ayahuasca during a more prolonged retreat. I never do it as a one-time ceremony because there has to be a greater context that is pointing to one's own life, that allows you to see how you can face yourself more fully and make it sustainable, not just work on yourself during the ceremony, but life itself is a ceremony. And so what does it mean in everyday life? And ayahuasca can be engaged in different ways as a discipline, as a tool. So ayahuasca in ancient times, it was also a spiritual discipline in and of itself. And of course, the people who would come into it, they would be initiated through a prolonged process without drinking ayahuasca first. Just by growing up in that culture, by connecting to the elders, the guidance, the initiation, the blueprints of evolution that were presented through creation myths and different stories, the indigenous stories. And so then people would start to relate to that as their own process of evolution, of facing oneself, discovering one's spark, engaging with the sicknesses, with conditions as communications, as intelligent communications of a higher organism. This is something that today, to a great degree, has been lost, and people taking it totally out of context, then are not really making sense of themselves through the experience. People see it as a very mystical thing that is full of all kinds of phantasmagorical forces and creatures, and then that misses the whole point, right? For the indigenous people, it was never about a hippie trippy kind of experience of having all kinds of visions and being blasted, but how can I actually utilize that to face the harsh existence? And they lived in a very harsh environment, all kinds of disasters and problems and dangerous animals and poisonous insects. And so then they needed to understand the reality that they lived in on a much deeper level and connect with their intuition, see that there is a higher intelligence, an organic intelligence to the environment that they lived in. And then once you understand the algorithm of that language of nature that comes through our own organism and the greater organism at large, then it's possible to engage with it meaningfully and not as kind of survival mentality type of behavior. And so that's how people were able to thrive within the harsh environment. And this is something that I'm very inspired to share with the world because I see that it's disappearing more and more. And there's ayahuasca concerts and all kinds of things that are happening, which I have nothing against. There's time and place for everything, but there's a much deeper approach to it, which I'm inspired to preserve and share with the world, because yeah, there's time and place for everything, but I don't want this deeper way to disappear. And then all that remains from the ayahuasca tradition is a sideshow attraction. And that's not very inspiring to me, at least. So definitely ayahuasca is a tool within a very ancient science, the evolutionary science, and it's the science of consciousness. And I've been fortunate enough to catch the indigenous elders that I studied with before they departed this world. And then they also didn't have many people they could share their heritage with. And I'm very grateful because that saved my own life. And so then that out of gratitude, then I've been continuously sharing the little that I've been able to absorb from the elders.
Yeah, and it's definitely very apparent when sitting in a ceremony with you of how much reverence you hold for that lineage. And again, I'll always remember to the very first night of you saying that you're not an ayahuasca bartender. So if that was your intention coming here, you're in the wrong place. And that was like what really solidified why I was there and why I felt that you were the right person that I was meant to sit with through that ceremony, because you held that respect. You held such a beautiful container that was all about the intention. And my intention in the first ceremony drastically changed by the second ceremony, because I was able to witness the fact that no, this wasn't about having a trip. This was about coming into myself and being open to what wisdom that I was missing, that I wasn't willing to see in my day-to-day, even though it was always there.
Yeah, that's very much what it is utilized for in my experience, is a tool to connect the mind, body, and heart together, and to train the mind. So the mind needs to be trained to honor the heart rather than cover it up. And then how we utilize the creative energy in our life. Are we utilizing it to run away from ourselves and cover up and pretend, or we utilize the creative energy to actually face the challenges, the difficulties, the adversities in our life?
Yeah. So I think this is a perfect moment to ask you the signature question here at Embrace and Expand of, what did you have to embrace within your life in order to expand into the person that you are today?
I had to embrace the unembraceable, or what seemed to me the unembraceable. And so I had to go into the shadow realm. And again, this is something that is a lifelong process. And within these traditions that we work with, it's considered to be a blessing because it's never boring, right, on this path. And like I was sharing initially, I was experiencing it more on a physical level. And then once I resolved the physical level, I saw it was the tip of the iceberg, and then continuously practicing ways to go beyond my limitations, right? One of my teachers, he shared with me once, don't limit your challenges, but challenge your limitations instead. And so that's basically what this ancient paths are for, is to go beyond the conditioning of our lives and to find those unconditional qualities within oneself, to tap in, because we live in a conditioned reality, and everything that we are experiencing in this conditional world is conditional, right? It's limited. Even the greatest pain that we are experiencing in our physical body is limited by the neuroreceptors in our being. And then there is a state within our being that is unconditional, that goes beyond the conditions. And the indigenous people have learned to tap into that state in a very practical way, like how to be free from suffering, how to not be overwhelmed and embarrassed by life, by what happens in life. And so this is something that there is nothing greater for me to be inspired by than to be free. And so in these traditions, the happiness, the timeless happiness, it is not found in pleasure. But in these traditions, they see that the true happiness can only be found in the freedom of the heart to be open with all the ups and downs, to not shut down. And so that kind of happiness is not bound. The pleasure will inevitably alternate with pain. That's just how we are set up. Our body is set up to experience pain. And at the same time, if we tie our unhappiness to pain, then we are bound to experience it. And then if we see that the true happiness is only possible when shared, when it's reciprocated, when I'm not just constantly grasping onto myself and just want me to be happy on the account of everyone else, or don't want to face my own issues, right? It's like death is something that only happens with other people, and I don't have to deal with it. I don't have to deal with other issues until it's in my face. And then often it's too late, right? It's good to prepare ahead of time. And that's what indigenous traditions have been doing throughout thousands of years. All of those things that we have been running away from in our modern society. And we have the whole entertainment industry for that, and the pharmaceutical industry, just to cover things up, not deal with the pain, whether it's existential pain or physical pain. And within the indigenous cultures, the indigenous people have been learning throughout thousands of years how to face all of that: old age, sickness, loss of loved ones, death, how to engage with that as rites of passage that awaken our highest potential of human beings, that awaken our true timeless essence that can never disappear, that can allow us to embody greater and greater states of unconditional love. And so this is something that can be very helpful in our modern society. And so then these traditions, they show how every moment of life can be that training ground for the true nature that is unconditional within our being to come forth, to become more rooted in our essence. And then it's the continuous reminders, because the reason I've been with these traditions for so long, right? Because it's been a continuous deepening of that process. And deeper purifications and greater blessings. And there's no blessings without purification. The purification essentially is resistance to life, right? Purifying that resistance and discovering greater and greater freedom. So yeah, this is something that I continuously go deeper with.
Yeah. And, you know, your podcast, Life is a Ceremony, speaks exactly that. It's like treating every single day and every moment of life as a ceremony. And again, to reference back to the end of the retreat, is you kind of told us on the last day that, you know, now is really where the true work begins. Is how do we take everything that we learned from that 10 days that we all spent together and actually integrate that into our life so that we can begin to live out those messages and wisdom teachings that we received, and not just chalk it up to, well, that was a great 10 days in the jungle and now I'm going to go back and live my life as normal, and just kind of fall back into those same patterns and routines. How do you continually keep life treating it like a ceremony? How do you keep integrating everything that you have come to you through ceremony, through life's challenges and the experiences that you continue to have?
Well, that's what I was saying earlier. I didn't finish my line of thought. But yeah, that's why I've been on this path for so many years. It's because I know how easily I forget. I mean, I don't forget the keys, or where I leave my shoes, on which side of the door, but I forget to come back into the heart. I forget to become present in the here and now. I get spun out in my mind, in the stories. And so because I recognize that weakness in my being, then I surrounded myself with reminders. And like I said, happiness in these traditions, the more true happiness has to be shared. It cannot be grasped upon. It can only be shared. The more I share it, the more I tap into it. And so in this path, initially, people come onto this path as consumers. Like, I just want to resolve my issues. I just want to find happiness, and I don't want to suffer. And then gradually becoming the generators of that. And so then I see that if I'm constantly depending on conditions of somebody else providing that for me, of needing to go to retreat to continue my spiritual path, and then I'm not really responsible for my journey, for my life. And so then gradually I start to see, no, I actually have to generate, I have to maintain my own practice, I have to keep reminding myself, and I can be of service to others. I'm not just doing it for myself, right? That's also in these traditions, the aini, the interconnectedness, the reciprocity. So I cannot be of benefit to others if I'm confused and disturbed myself. And that becomes a motivation. I need to resolve my own confusion and disturbance so that I can be of greater benefit to others. And I can share with others what I find beneficial so that I can continuously practice it in myself. So that becomes a very interconnected process.
And that, you know, you kind of touch on the fact of, like, I know several people who have done, 30 or more ayahuasca ceremonies over like the last 5 years. And it always makes me wonder, because it's been about 5 years, almost 5 years since I sat with you. I experienced it twice and I haven't experienced it since then, because I feel that I'm still integrating a lot of what I learned daily through those ceremonies. So until I'm to the point where I feel like I have fully embodied everything that I learned, it doesn't do me any good to dive back in until I'm actually at that point. So do you feel like there is kind of a give and take on, maybe there is benefit to continuing to go back into that journey, or is it like I've kind of described, of really you should take that time, and as long as that time is necessary to integrate all of that information before you come back to any of these plant teachers, and not just keep dipping your toes in the water?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mentioned it earlier in our conversation. There are different ways to engage with ayahuasca as an instrument, as a skillful mean, right? Because an instrument, you can engage with it in different ways. And so traditionally, there is a way where only ayahuasca is the spiritual path within the Amazonian cosmology. And so even within that, there are different approaches. So there are the path of vegetalistas in the Amazon that work with different non-entheogenic or visionary plant medicines. And then they utilize ayahuasca on the side to amplify the effects of the other plant medicines. And then there is also the kind of very general, like, main distinctions. There are many. It's a very intricate tradition within the Amazon. Another approach is the ayahuasquero tradition, that is more the one that I specialize in and studied with. And this tradition works more with ayahuasca as a tool of consciousness. And so there's a lot more intricacy within that tradition in terms of the ayahuasca. Ayahuasca doesn't just amplify the effects of other plants and is utilized kind of as a secondary tool. But within the ayahuasca tradition, ayahuasca is the main tool of consciousness, and then there's a lot more intricacy, how to engage with one's own being on a more conscious level with the help of this tool, and then see all the plant medicines that are not psychoactive as a connection to essential human qualities on a more conscious level. Within the Vegetalista path, it takes place on a more intuitive level. I'm not so aware that I'm cultivating those essential human qualities, but through the dietas and time in isolation and nature with plants and with oneself, intuitively those qualities, they start to be cultivated. Then within the consciousness ayahuasca tradition, then it's done in a lot more aware way. You become a werewolf, right? And aware. And so you start to engage with those forces of nature and harness them more and more consciously, and then see how the different plants, they are keys that activate those qualities within oneself. But it's essential to actually turn the key consciously to face oneself in that way. And so then that's how it was in ancient time. And of course, there were many traditions in the Amazon that were like branches of that evolutionary science. And then in today's world, we have many spiritual paths and disciplines from different parts of the world, and people come to us who already have a main discipline. And what I love about these traditions is that they're not sectarian, that they don't require you to join some kind of a cult and worship a particular deity. And then you can apply the tools to whatever path you're on in life, and it will enhance your insight into the path that you're already on. And so within that approach, ayahuasca is a supplementary tool where people come to us often and engage with it as a way to check oneself. Okay, I think that I'm practicing and I'm making some progress and I'm doing my special meditation practice or yoga or QiGong or whatever it is. And so then people come into the ayahuasca ceremony, and then it helps people to get real with themselves. Oh, I've been fooling myself that I'm, such an advanced spiritual practitioner, and ayahuasca does raise the intensity or helps us to see the intensity that is already present within our being. It opens the wings of our perception, and then suddenly I can see how much I'm fooling myself, how much I'm pretending and hiding. And so it's very helpful to get real, in my experience. And that's another way to engage with that tool, is to see, well, yeah, I can see that it's not about the spiritual materialism that I'm going to find some kind of a perfect state and then I'm gonna just float on a cloud, and I'm never gonna have any issues again in my life, and everything is gonna be perfect. That's very boring, and there is no evolution, and it doesn't exist, right? It's an illusion. And if you discover it, or anyone who's listening, please tell me. But that it's not an illusion. But yeah, it's not really possible to float on the cloud. So within this living wisdom traditions, the spiritual progress is not about how blissful your ceremony was. It's not about how great you're feeling in the moment. The spiritual progress is that you're gonna experience greater and greater difficulties inevitably in your life, but you're not gonna be overtaken by them. You're not gonna lose yourself in the face of them. You can maintain the open heart in the face of that. And so then within these traditions, one of my teachers, somebody asked him, well, how do you measure spiritual growth? And he said two things: how much more patient you become, how much more compassionate you become. Those are the main gauges. And again, this is going against the common narrative in society today, in the new age culture and spirituality, where people are wearing all kinds of spiritual medals. I've done so many ceremonies. Ayahuasca came to me and told me that I'm enlightened and I don't have to drink any more ayahuasca and all kinds of things. So it's very easy to misinterpret those messages that are coming from one's own conditioning and are sounding like it's Jesus Christ or Buddha is saying that. Just because it's comfortable for me to hear it. And the ego is very tricky. So these traditions, it's not just the ayahuasca, but the guidance within these traditions, these lineages that have been able to navigate. And so then my teachers would tell me in the beginning, they said the first year, and I was drinking, and I was engaged with it as a discipline, right, in and of itself. And so I was doing it quite often. And then my elders told me they said the first year, I was drinking maybe twice a week the first year. And then they told me, don't make conclusions, don't jump to conclusions. Don't be hasty in interpreting. Give it time, give it observation. They said the first year, 70% of what you're going to experience, see, and hear in ayahuasca is going to be a total lie and illusion that your own mind is tricking you with. And you have to actually give it time and not jump to conclusions to see what it really means. Because the messages are coming, the universal messages are coming, but they are filtered through the swamp of our conditioning, like what you shared, those first 7 years of our life and beyond that. So that was very helpful for me to understand that it's part of a greater context. And then other people also come into the retreats that we're doing as not for not for ayahuasca. I mean, ayahuasca is a tool, but then they're coming for the real medicine within these traditions that we are working with, is the healing circle. That's the real medicine, and I can swear by it. It's more powerful than ayahuasca and any other substance that we can take. But it's this intentional container, the people that are coming together and are bringing their focus of consciousness, the focal point of their deepest intentions, to be honest, to face themselves, to be sincere, to open up, and then to share the challenges among ourselves, to discover that there is the power of the shared heart if we can become vulnerable. And that is the greatest power within these traditions, and they guide towards that. Then ayahuasca becomes a tool to awaken that collective intention. And then that is how the deepest healing taking place, through each other. And then we utilize different practices, different tools. Actually, many people find the dream work that we engage with, which is the Ashwar tribe practice that we are bridging through the Jungian psychology to make it more coherent for our modern mind. And many people find that to be more powerful than ayahuasca, because it's your own dreams, your own life that is communicating to you, and you start to understand that language beyond the shadow of a doubt. Then other people find the breathwork to be the most powerful. So other people QiGong. So everything within the retreat is geared to help people integrate that original state of being into their everyday life. And so then, of course, ayahuasca is not available everywhere, and it's not about that. But how can we maintain the natural state of being, the organic intelligence, the interconnectedness, the openness in our lives? That's the greatest medicine. And so in these traditions, I was just remembering my elders would share with me, basically in those words, just being alive is healing in itself. Everything else is just here to help us remember that, including ayahuasca and all of the practices and formal meditation. But it's not about that. That's not what it's for. It's about helping us become alive, become open, fully present in the here and now, not hide, not run away from the difficulties, right? And so how can we do that more continuously? That is the greatest medicine. And so as much as I appreciate people coming for our retreats, I'm continuously finding ways to support people no matter where they're at in the world. And with many different tools and practices and insights, because it's really about being alive. And we can honor the ancestors through their traditions and then implement it in our lives in the way that is the most relevant.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so perfectly said. And I completely agree with you that the most powerful thing about being a part of that retreat was all the people that were there, of all the people being vulnerable with each other and having everybody to recognize that even though we all walk different paths, we all look different, we all talk different, fundamentally, we all share similar sufferings. We all share similar weaknesses, but we all share similar strengths. And that's why when we gather together as a collective, there's so much more healing that can happen than if we just try and lone wolf it, if we just try and do it all on our own. And, well, I'm just going to every day tick all of these boxes of all these spiritual practices that I do, and I'm slowly getting better and better. But then when you're put into a community, you realize truly how much work there is still to do for the collective, because at the end of the day, and that was the message that I received going into my second ceremony, that second ceremony wasn't about me. It was about me being there to hold space for everybody else. And I didn't have any visions or any mystical experiences or any aha moments or messages that came to me, except for just be present and hold space for those that are going through it. Eventually it will be your turn.
That can be the most powerful mystical experience, is just this ability to hold presence and to be centered in the heart. And also what you mentioned, that's how these traditions work. They help us awaken to that. They help us see the interconnectedness, that connection, the relatedness, the vulnerability that we experience in the intentional circles. That's priceless. It's something that is becoming more and more rare in the world that we live in today. And there's so much healing within that. And openness, and also within these ancient traditions, also why I am so grateful for them, is because within these traditions, it's not about personal development or a path of accomplishment, self-accomplishment. It's a path of realization. It's realizing what has been here all along. We have the raw ingredients for true happiness to be timelessly experienced in our lives. And so, of course, once we realize how to put those ingredients together, then we start to have the recipe of transformation. And so then it's the inner beauty, right? The inner beauty of the heart that can transform all the ugliness into compassion. And so then we start to recognize that more and more and put the ingredients together. See, we are all diamonds in the raw. And so then we help to polish the diamond, to chip away at it a little bit more and a little bit more every time. And the community, the spiritual community, the friends and helpers on the way, the tribe within these traditions, that is the most essential. And of course, self-honesty, right? Coupled with self-honesty, because you can have all the practices, all the tools, all the magical potions that you can lay your hands on, but if there is no willingness to face oneself, none of it will work. Right? So then, with those two ingredients, it becomes possible.
Yeah, I feel like you just kind of touched on that point of the spiritual ego that exists quite a bit within the spiritual community of it's just all about achieving enlightenment, but it's not about the destination. It's just about the journey of life. Enlightenment is just a state, but it's not a state that we'd want to live in all the time because, like you touched on earlier, that'd be super boring to only exist in this one plane of existence when we are here to experience all that life has to offer. And that includes, you know, all of the hardships and challenges, because on the other side of that, as the pendulum swings to the other side, we experience those blissful states, and it helps us to, I think, really have gratitude for those challenges that we've had in life, because if we didn't have those challenges, we wouldn't be able to recognize the other side of them.
Right. Yeah. If we don't experience the darkness, we don't appreciate the light.
Yeah.
And also that there is no light without the darkness. There is no darkness without the light. The greater the shadow, the greater the light that the shadow is casting. Right. So those are just the laws of nature. And yeah, absolutely. Well, in these traditions, again, it's not about pleasure. It's not about bliss. And enlightenment is a state of mind. It's not about not having issues, but how we engage with those issues, how we transform the poison into medicine. And that's how these traditions work. We have all of those disturbing emotions, and then actually it's through awareness that they can be actually very productive emotions. Anger, if I'm not overwhelmed by it, it can become a sense of determination. Fear can become greater alertness and presence, discernment. Right? So then how we engage with our experience of life is what makes all the difference. And that's really what the disciplines are for in these traditions, because there's nothing that can be accumulated. I can have the most blissful, enlightening experience, and then I turn around and I'm more miserable and confused than ever.
Yeah.
And so then it's very easily comes and goes. And so in these traditions, it's not about that, but actually it's about this enlightened attitude. In our Tibetan lineage, they call it enlightened attitude. In the Amazonian, sometimes they refer to it as the heroic disposition or the uplifting mood in life, or the warrior's mood. In the Toltec tradition, the mood of the warrior. And so that's the only thing that we can cultivate. That's the only thing that can stay with us, right, is our attitude towards life. And so these traditions are about cultivating this more spacious, more objective attitude towards life, not to throw in the towel, to maintain a smile in the face of adversity. And so, yeah, that's what the discipline is really about.
Yeah.
Experience hardship and still keep a smile, and not just grin, like, bear it and grin, but actually like real smile. So like our indigenous elders in Amazon, also here in the Andes, in our Quero elder, such a beautiful teacher of that. Right? I think you met him, Juan Gabriel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
From the Quero Nation. He's like the first generation to come into our modern civilization. And that's his main discipline. is to maintain, an amazing attitude no matter what happens.
Yeah, it's a beautiful individual.
Mm-hmm.
So I know there's a lot of people who are probably listening to this like, okay, I would love to experience all of this, but there's no way that I'm flying down to Peru. I can't take off that amount of time of work. I know you do have several online offerings. Do you want to touch on those really quick before we call it an episode?
Sure. Well, we have an evolutionary blueprint course online, and that blueprint course has the main indigenous pillars, the scientific indigenous pillars that we work with. So it has the journey of remembering one's own original essence. Again, in these traditions, truth is not a philosophical concept, but it's a state of being, a natural state of being that we can experience and recognize to be true in ourselves, something that we've experienced since before we were born into this world while in the mother's womb. And the evolutionary blueprint course involves the practice of remembrance, the practice of understanding the communication of nature and how it comes through every moment and experience of our lives. It has an introduction into the Amazonian breathwork practice and also the complementary practice from the Taoist healing tradition that we work with is the Shengong, the QiGong practice that works with inner qualities that is very parallel to the Amazonian Andean paths that we work with. And also has some introduction of the Tibetan lineages that we work with. So that course is a great overview. And it has the main indigenous practices, the focuses, and the guidance that we work with. Then we also have, in and of itself, a Shengong Qigong course, the Alchemy of Immortality Qigong course, that works with both Andean art of being. In the Andes, there is a similar physical practice. And so they're very parallel to each other. So we have a course just for that. And then we also have a course for breathwork. And we are actually currently working at enhancing those courses and reworking them, making them much more interactive and with greater follow-up, with more content, and keep enriching that. But even as it is, many people find benefit in that. Also, I'm in the process of publishing my first book that I've been writing for the past 17 years, and I just got accepted by a publisher, and now they want to keep editing it based on the teachings. I made it more as a kind of an adventure story that follows my path of connecting with these traditions, and they want to restructure it based on the main teachings of the indigenous. Mainly, it's going to be pointing to the Yahua tribe that they're the ones that I'm still maintaining a connection with throughout last 20 years and more. And they are the ones that have the most elaborate cosmology of all the tribes in the Amazon today. And so the book is focusing a lot on introducing the Amazonian wisdom through the Yahua creation myths and cosmology. And I recently visited them, and they're going through a lot of hardship right now, but still smiling through it. And like half of the tribe is going through malaria epidemic, and they've been like political upheavals here in Peru and COVID, and they've been really struggling. So we just did like an emergency food supply campaign, like food staples to them, and they're very happy that the first book ever about the Yagua wisdom is coming out into the world. And so that book also introduces, it's supposed to be also a companion for the evolutionary blueprint course, because it introduces all the practices that are shared in the course, but through a life story that can be easier to connect with for people rather than technical knowledge. And then people can relate that to their own life. And so hopefully within a year, it will be out. And We just finished a breathwork course over this past weekend, and the weekend before was our Alchemy of Immortality, Indian Art of Being course. And we also go on tours on occasion, so we might be going to the US in August. I have 2 small children, so we can go, as elaborate tours with practices and retreats. When we go on tours, we have 2 main retreats that we're doing. We do the breathwork immersion retreat, the primordial breathwork of the Amazonian and the Tibetan breathworks that we are working with. And then we also have a form and formless retreat, which we engage with all of the practices and tools that we do here in Peru, but with the exception of the entheogenics and the psychoactive plant medicines. We do work with cacao instead, and actually people find it to be even more life-changing when we do those short 4-day retreats in the US without psychoactive plants, because people are really focusing on tools that they can take into their everyday life. And so then in long time ago, before my kids came around, I used to do plant medicine retreat. Small retreats, like 3-4 days, in the US with ceremonies. But then there was not enough time to connect with the greater context of the indigenous traditions. And then I found over time that, there are so many people doing ceremonies, and I wasn't interested in being a bartender, as you shared. And I was more inspired to share tools that people can really cultivate in their everyday life, and also to connect with people who just want to continue evolving and working on themselves, and not just come into a ceremony once in a while just to as a pressure release valve or to get blasted. Because I've had many people like that, but I didn't find that to be a very intentional kind of community process.
Yeah.
And now I'm a lot more inspired because there are people who are conscious, who are continuously facing themselves, working on themselves, also engaging in different modalities and sharing within their community. And so we are now developing a much greater network of intentional practitioners, and we are supporting each other. And that's been very fulfilling for me. That's what keeps me going over the years, people like you and others, that we keep coming together and we're witnessing the transformation, the evolution over time, and then support each other to continue and go deeper. But otherwise, somebody just coming and they're not interested in the tradition, they're not interested in self, discipline and work. They just want to have an experience and be blasted.
Yeah.
And so that's not so inspiring for me.
Well, I can say here in my desk in one of my drawers, I have my journal that I brought with me that was my dream journal leading up to the retreat, and that I took all of my notes, and I am constantly revisiting that and rereading from the experiences that I had down there, rereading over all of the dream cosmology that you go in. And I'm sure I missed a ton of what you had to say because there's just so much wisdom packed into those 10 days. But I can say that that was one of the biggest takeaways for me from that retreat, was that this is a practice. It wasn't about that one retreat, and it wasn't about needing to constantly come back and do it again and again, like I've touched on, but more about how can I keep showing up every single day and just trying to apply a little bit more of that knowledge, and recognizing that even when I slide down the spiral and I kind of, like you said, spin out in my own mind sometimes, and I get super overwhelmed and feel like I've taken 20 steps backwards, to recognize that that in itself is part of the journey, that it's just about, okay, I've fallen down, now it's time to get back up and start again, and then learn how can I maybe prevent that from happening again in the future, or how can I shorten the time period in which I spin out, and just greet it, like you said, with a smile, and recognize, like, okay, here I am again. Now it's time to keep moving on.
Absolutely. I think it was Socrates that said that awareness of ignorance is the seed of wisdom. So yeah, I very much resonate with that. If I cannot be young and stupid first, I cannot be old and wise later.
Yeah.
I'll just be old and stupid later. So it's essential to allow that experience in one's life to learn from it. Absolutely. Yeah, very much so. And it's just to add, I have people sometimes that I don't hear from them until like 10 years after the retreat. During COVID, actually, I had quite a few people. I guess people had time on their hands. And people wrote to me suddenly out of the blue after 10 years. And they were telling me how, they had all those recordings from the collective shares and the talks during the retreat and all of this information. And they got back into it after 10 years, and they didn't realize how much of it just went over their heads, and also how many seeds were planted that continuously have been sprouting. And 10 years later, they write to me and they're so blown away by the retreat that happened so long ago, and it's still so active. So yeah, that's very inspiring for me. Like I wouldn't do this otherwise, but it's really witnessing people discovering themselves, awakening to their potential, overcoming their challenges. I haven't experienced greater happiness in my life. Even overcoming my own issues, I haven't experienced as much happiness as when I see others do it. And so that's a continuous source of inspiration.
Yeah.
So I continuously see ways that we can work together, weave, collaborate, make this world a better place, being the change that we wish to see in the world. And that's how these traditions keep on going. And I'm grateful for you to take it to heart and then to keep sharing it through your life in a way that is relevant for you and through your unique talents and qualities. And then we all do our part in that way. So yeah, I am very thankful to be here with you, and also all the work that you're doing with your audience and raising awareness in the world. So definitely, let's keep going.
Absolutely. So as we start winding down here, what would be one final nugget of wisdom that you would like to give to the listeners, that's something that they could apply to their lives to bring these wisdom teachings into the day-to-day?
Well, this is something that you shared, and I'll just share it in a way of the Q'ero elders here in the Andes, where there is no right and wrong. In these traditions, there is no concept of right and wrong. And where wrong can never become right, bad can never become good. Instead, they see everything as ignorance and wisdom. And ignorance is potentially already wisdom. It's a stepping stone. And in that way also, instead of having the right and wrong or good and bad, it's the complementary opposites. And so here in the Andes also, they have the heavy energy and the light energy. And so then the heavy energy transforms into the light. And so it's essential to honor everything in our lives, all the ups and downs, and then to keep finding ways to discover the potential of the heart, to hold space for it all. So this is a continuous focus for me, and I see that it can bring a lot of benefit to the world if people are more rooted in their potential of the heart.
Yeah. I think that really is what it's all about, is just coming back to the heart and remembering to share it.
Yeah.
That's how we really find that true depth of love, is when we share it.
Absolutely. And then we need the mind to share it skillfully.
Yes.
So there's the mind in service of the heart.
Yeah.
The complementary opposites.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, Roman, thank you so much for your time. I am so grateful that we were able to connect and get you onto the podcast so that the listeners could finally hear your true voice and hear the wisdoms coming from you instead of me relaying them as I have over the last season of the podcast. So
you're doing a great job. You said some things that I wouldn't have said better myself.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you everyone for listening. Much love, everyone. Take care of yourself and each other.
And thank you all for being here. I'm going to post in the show notes below of how you can get in touch with Roman, how you can find him on his website to look at the courses, look at the retreats that he has to offer, and see all of the beautiful things that they are doing with Paititi Institute. So thank you again for being here. As always, I greatly appreciate you, and I'll catch you on the next one.